Hi everybody, welcome to a new series of videos that I'm doing ranking the Paul McCartney albums, but in a slightly different way to normal. If you've not visited my channel before, my name is Andrew. I do videos about the Beatles and members of and various other music related topics as well. I like to keep on top of all the latest Beatles related news. If that's of interest, please hit that subscribe button. But what are these videos all about? So I'm going to be ranking the Paul McCartney solo albums from the time that he left the Beatles right through to McCartney III in 2020. But I'm going to be doing it a little bit differently. I'm going to be starting off working backwards. I'm going to start with McCartney III and I'm going to work back right through to 1970s McCartney over a series of videos. And I'm going to do the albums in reverse order and I'm going to slot them in where I think they fit as a ranking of Paul McCartney albums. Now, how am I ranking them? I'm not thinking particularly of what's the best, what's his most artistic statement. I'm going purely on my enjoyment of the album. How much do I enjoy listening to this album? And that's where I'm going to slot it in these rankings. So we are going to start with 2020's McCartney III, and then we will, as we go back, we will see where the other albums fit around this. So what do I think of this album? Well, I've done a couple of videos on this already, but essentially this album it was such a surprise in 2020, that the fact that this thing even exists. McCartney III was kind of a mythical thing for years that we never really expected we were going to get, and thanks to lockdown, here it is. And I think the album is so much better than it could have been, and I don't mean that as an insult in any way. It's just, you know, people make good albums, people make albums that are not so good. This album, really, whatever expectations I had, this exceeds them. It gets off to a great start with Long-Tailed Winter Bird, really sort of mainly instrumental song, obviously, but it really sets a nice groove for the album. And I think groove is a word that applies really well to this album. A lot of the songs are built around a groove. Things like Deep, Deep Feeling, it's an epic. It goes on forever, but it's not so much of a song, more of a kind of a soundscape, and works really well as such. Deep Down as well, I know, which is not a lot of people's sort of least favourite song on the album, but again, I think it's got a really good groove to it. I kind of liken it to the song Frank Sinatra's Party, which was eventually released during the sort of Egypt Station era. Deep Down feels to me like it's that same party, but it's just maybe 2 o'clock in the morning and everybody's just coming down a little bit. It feels like it's got that kind of a vibe. And it was great to have When Winter Comes at the end here, which was recorded on the same day as Calico Skies in 1992, but held over for this. And it was kind of really the catalyst for the album. Paul was doing some work on that song. There was a video being made for it, and it was kind of off the back of that the session started that resulted in McCartney III. So although it's kind of completely out of place on this album, the album only really sort of exists because of that song. So McCartney III is going straight in its own place at the start of this list, and as we work back we're going to see how that kind of fits around it. But McCartney III is a really enjoyable album, and remember, that's what I'm basing this on, is how much do I enjoy the album. So moving back to the previous album, 2018's Egypt Station. So this was like a really massive album for me, and obviously for a lot of people as well. The build up to it, and I actually took the day off work on release day because I wanted to go to the shops, buy it, just spend the day listening to it. And I've loved this album ever since the day it came out. It's, at the time, I thought that this might be Paul's last album, as I guess probably quite a few people did. Obviously we know now that's not to be the case, but there are so many clues on this album that suggest that it could have been Paul's last album, and had that turned out to be the case, there's all sorts of things on here that I think historians would have pored over for years. I did a video, one of the very first videos that I did that was not long after this came out, where I went into all those theories. I'll put a link to that video at the end if you want to have a watch of that, of me in my early YouTube days talking about the Egypt Station last album theories. But again, I think that there's so much on here that's really kind of unexpectedly good. Dominoes, I think, is a fantastic late era Paul McCartney song. Happy With You is a really beautiful song where I used to have a poster on my wall where I was back in 2018 when this came out, of the Beatles, that kind of era when they were going into the BBC studios in like 1963. And I was listening to Happy With You and looking at that photo of Paul there and kind of thinking, oh yeah, it's that guy on that poster. What's he been up to in the sort of 55 years since? Oh, this is him telling us actually he's doing okay. He's had a good life. And that's how I've kind of always listened to that song. I love the end of this album, despite repeated warnings. Station 2, Hunt You Down, Naked Ceiling. I think it's a great end to the album. I honestly didn't think that when Memory Almost Full came out, I really loved that album, and we'll see where that slots in later on. I didn't think he would make an album again that I preferred to Memory Almost Full. But he did with this. Little spoiler alert for the rankings there. And when I've had to sort of put it up against McCartney III, I enjoy McCartney III very much. But this is just a little notch ahead for me. And I still, towards the back end of this album, it kind of gets me like almost no other album ever. And I'm really not quite sure why. There's no logical reason for it, but it does. I get a bit emotional with this album. So at the moment, that is going up into top spot in terms of albums that is released from Egypt Station onwards. It's currently my favourite. We're now going back to 2013 and the new album. Again, I remember the build up to this. There was an awful lot of hype to this when the song New, I remember that got put out onto YouTube as kind of the first teaser of the album. It's, oh, that's good. Paul's doing a kind of an up-tempo pop song, brilliant, sort of typical McCartney pop song. And then the album came out, and I played this album an awful lot when it first came out. And I think I would now look at it as a bit of a mixed bag. There are certain portions of this album that I really like. So if we look at the section that goes from Queenie Eye, Early Days, New, Appreciate, I think that's a really good 4-song run on this album. That many Paul McCartney albums, I feel, don't have a 4-song run that I enjoy as much as those 4. I thought Appreciate was, in terms of the creativity and the boundaries he was still pushing, for a man who had just hit his 70s at this point, was way beyond anything we should expect. His peers were not doing anything remotely as creative as he was still doing then, and he's still doing now, to be honest. I think Alligator is a really good song. But yeah, I do think this is a little bit of a mixed bag. So when I slot it into my rankings of what is now his last 3 albums, I'm going to put this one at the bottom for the moment. We're now going back another year in time to 2012, and Kisses on the Bottom. Please reissue this on vinyl, Paul. I don't want to be stuck with a CD forever. This was obviously Paul's attempt at doing a kind of standards album that the likes of Rod Stewart have been churning out for many years now. But yeah, that was upside down now, I realise. Kisses on the Bottom, his standards album. And I know a lot of people have criticised the album title. Many people who've probably never even heard the album just see the album title and think, oh, I'm not listening to that, what a ridiculous title. But it makes perfect sense when you listen to the title track, but not the title track, the first song on the album. I'm going to sit right down and write myself a letter, and I'll put Kisses on the bottom. It's Kisses on the bottom of the letter. Makes perfect sense in that regard. But I think they got obviously a top class band in to do this. And it really sort of shows the authenticity of the musicians that are performing on this. It is unusual to sort of listen to a Paul album, or well, pretty much unprecedented, and not have him playing instruments on it. I think his older voice at this point suits the songs. Things like, well, we've got My Valentine, which was his big original song for this, which Michael Bublé's recently done a cover of. Not particularly a fan of, but it's good to see that the song's getting recognition. And I think it's just a good selection of chilled out, classic written standard songs. And I do enjoy listening to this, but I probably don't enjoy it as much as the 3 albums that he's done since. So in my ranking at the moment, it's going to go down at the bottom in terms of the albums that he's released from this onwards. We now go back to 2008, and it's what is currently the most recent Fireman album. Will we ever get another Fireman album? Who knows, we shall see. It's Electric Arguments. So again, we need the vinyl of this. We need a reissue on vinyl, please, for goodness sake. There's the sticker that was on the front of my CD when I bought it, which I managed to keep. So this is obviously very different to the other two Fireman albums in that this is much more of a traditional kind of Paul McCartney album, but it's one where it's him pushing the boundaries a lot more. So it would be quite far out for a normal Paul McCartney album. Paul said a long time ago that he wanted to make an album called Paul McCartney Goes Too Far. Well, this wouldn't be too far, but it might have been the kind of thing that he was thinking of. The lead single that came out from this, Nothing Too Much Just Out of Sight, I mean, it sounded to me like it was going to be, it was almost like Led Zeppelin were back with some of the sort of big crunching guitar on that. Sing the Changes, I think, is a modern day McCartney classic, one of his best songs of the 21st century, and certainly the only thing from here that Paul was doing live. So that showed you what Paul thought of it as well. But it's a really interesting listen. You do get about sort of halfway through the album and think, oh, this must be, we must be getting near the end, but then there's like another half to go. It is quite a long album, but definitely fun to listen to. It's definitely, I always appreciate hearing Paul McCartney's more creative side and hearing him trying to be creative and seeing what he can come up with. And this is a very enjoyable way to spend some time listening to him doing that kind of thing. I hope he does this kind of thing again. But yeah, we will see. So where it sits for me in my rankings is just below McCartney III. Remember I'm talking here about which albums do I enjoy listening to the most. I'd probably put McCartney III ahead of this, but certainly ahead of New and Kisses. So currently it's sitting mid-table. And then we go back another year to Memory Almost Full from 2007. This is the main version that I've got. Now, I mentioned a little earlier before that I didn't think that he would make another album that was better than this, but I felt that he did with Egypt Station. So that tells you that I've got a lot of love for this album. I think Dance Tonight is a song that it's kind of one of those songs that is very easy for people to bash, but it's so catchy. Paul McCartney is the ultimate master at making simple, catchy songs that will annoy some people and other people will see it for being a fantastic, catchy song. I see it as a fantastic, catchy song. Ever Present Past is interesting, him sort of looking back on sort of how long he's been in this business, which he's done a few times over the years. There is some things on here that I don't like. Gratitude, for example, is probably in my top 5 Paul McCartney songs that I can't stand. I think it's one of the worst things he's ever done. Really don't like that. But then it really sort of gets back on track with a kind of a medley towards the end, which is fun. Before that, we've got Mr. Bellamy, which is a really interesting song. Now, I've always had this theory about the song Mr. Bellamy, that it's Mr. Bellamy is a cat stuck up in a tree. And I don't think that's Paul's official line on it, but it's kind of how I imagine the song. And the other characters are maybe the fire brigade coming out to rescue the cat from a tree. And I've always seen it as Paul's attempt at a kind of a Peter and the Wolf type of song. So Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf, where you've got each character in the story has got its own theme tune. That kind of happens here. Each time a different person is being focused on, or cat if it is a cat, which I know it isn't, but to me it is. Each time that character has been focused on, it goes to a particular style of song and their particular motif. I really love that. House of Wax is an interesting song. The first time I heard House of Wax, I thought this is the most overblown, pompous, ridiculous dad rock I have ever heard in my life. I hated it. The second time I heard it, I thought exactly the same thing. The third time, I thought, yeah, I think I can see what he's trying to do here. The fourth time I heard it, I absolutely loved it. And I've loved it ever since. The word epic was invented for House of Wax on Memory Almost Full. Really love that song. The End of the End, again, another song about being Paul McCartney. He's written a few songs that are about him and his life, and this is obviously him reflecting on what he wants to happen when the time comes when he passes away. A lot of people don't like nod your head being sort of stuck on at the end afterwards, but it's kind of a trick that Paul McCartney's done often throughout his career, where he just, something heavy's just happened, and we've just had House of Wax and the end of the end, pretty heavy, and he just tries to lighten the mood a bit. That's something that I want to talk about more in another video, but it's not everybody's favourite closer to an album, but I really enjoy Memory Almost Full, not quite as much as I enjoy Egypt Station, so in terms of from this album forwards, it's going into second place for me. That's all the albums that I'm going to cover in this video. Let me know in the comments what are your favourite of Paul's most recent albums and your least favourites, and I will be back soon with part 2, where we will go back in time again from Memory Almost Full and look at a few more of Paul's albums and slot them into this ranking that's slowly starting to build. I will see you very soon. Thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.